two different kinds of heads here, and how you'd pick a head for at least a preliminary head for racing, porting, and stuff like to make it more of a high performance head. Can you guys tell me by just looking at these, do you see any differences in these these three heads? Just, huh? Well, not the color, but the casting. It's kind of interesting because, I mean, I've looked at them for years until you really get down to studying them, you don't notice the differences. And really that's what this is all about, is noticing the differences. But there is a distinct difference between all three of these heads here, basically. One of them is not exactly the same as the other. Do you see it? Well, anyhow, this is far enough. You see this little casting part right here? You don't see that in these things right here. See, so these are these two are the same, and this one's different. What I find out is this particular casting.
See this?
Oh, that.
Yeah, and it's not here.
This particular casting actually comes off of a 1275 Sprite, and these are off of an automatic, or off a Austin America. Because of the difference in the casting here, but it still has all the same casting numbers on the things, basically. So it's 'cause there's the casting numbers. So they, but you know, regardless of either the castings, there's things that you got to look out for alignment, because when one of these castings are drilled, all the holes are drilled in it. All these big holes, the holes for tighten it down to the head, and the ones with the for the push rod holes.
People tell me about those new heads. Okay. Get those adapters.
My wife talk to him?
She's here, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, she'll push the button and the red light will come on.
So they got this great big mill things. If you ever watch a film of the factory doing these things, they come down here and they got all these drills, and they throw these heads in this thing, and then all these holes get drilled at once, basically. So if the casting is either one way or another in the mill, it makes a difference between what the alignment and the ports are. Because these holes are either this way or that way in the casting, basically, so they can shift back and forth. And of course, the key thing is that's on either side of the intake port. And so it kind of, to be able to get a head to flow better than the other one, the big deal is to get one that's well aligned before you start a grinding. And one of the clues that I've seen in all the heads, even, well, how about that? How about go back and get that other head?
That one from Montreal?
Yeah, and we'll show them that too. But one of the clues that I see is that, well, you look at the center hole right here. You can see this is a smaller stud hole than the rest of them.
This was all centered.
Well, yeah, but you see that this is a smaller hole.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, just set that across there or whatever. Now, but you take a look at this one. See the holes way up here, and all of these holes are shifted to the front of the head, basically. And when you get to marking the alignment on it all, you can just look down the ports and see that they're actually off to the side. So you can see that they're all shifted to the front, basically. So you'd have a hard time actually getting a good head built out of this one. You can make a decent head out of it to go back and forth to the grocery store, but if you really want to build a head that you know that you're going to perform with, basically you got to get one that's really a lot more well aligned than the others or whatever. And so the first clue I look at is where the bolt hole is, and you can see this one here is way towards the front.
That one's towards the back.
This one's towards the back. This one here is pretty much center, and this one here is towards the front. And basically anything that's past center here towards the front, I usually say is too much misaligned to make a really good cylinder head out of it. So it's someplace between this one here, which is in the center, and this one here to the rear, basically, so how these castings actually work. But if you start looking at them, this becomes actually pretty close to center line, and what you're doing is trying to make sure that all these things are in center of their push rod holes and stuff like that. So that when you start grinding on the ports and stuff like that, you can actually make a bigger hole out of it without running into your push rod holes. Because, well, this is a restriction, basically, when it comes to making a performance head out of it, that particular hole. But then again, I've seen heads flow, once you get that restriction open up or whatever. I've seen some that have smaller holes going through there that flow more than ones that have larger holes. So it isn't exactly the largest hole that you can put in there, but the more well-shaped hole that you can put in there without grinding a hole into the water passage or the push rod hole. And that's what alignment will do for you. If it gets off to one side and you're grinding it, you take a little bit off, and the next thing you know, you're right through trying to be able to match the curve or whatever to the other side. So it's a matter of being able to measure the thing out so that actually things are lined up. You spending all your time trying to grind on a head that isn't going to really come out to be maybe the best performance head that you can make, because it takes a lot of time to build one. And part of the reason why I say that this is really important is that you can spend, well, at this particular point, I'm about $17,000 on the bottom end. And if you don't spend, no matter how much money you spend on the bottom end, you can make a really nice motor and you can run the hell out of it and it'll stay together and do all the things, but bottom ends don't make you horsepower. And all your horsepower, no matter where you get it, it doesn't make any difference what camshaft you're using or what carburation you're using or anything. A good head will improve any of it. So the most important thing to a racing motor is its cylinder head, because it's just like the brains. The more flow you get through it, the more horsepower you get out of the other end. And if you got a flow problem with it, the other guy's going to go right on by you, because that's where all your horsepower, every bit of the horsepower comes out of that cylinder head right there. So if you really get down to real details or whatever, that's the most important and key thing to actually racing out of the whole motor, because that'll be the thing that'll produce you the most horsepower. I have, so Brian knows, running against motors that are over 1400 cc's. And we're still running a 40 over motor, which is 1312 or whatever, and we're turning faster times than they are. And in reality, you can build a big motor, get all that displacement, but if you can't get it through the cylinder head, it still doesn't make any difference. If I can get it through the cylinder head, I don't even have to build a motor that big, and I can still perform with it. But that's how important a cylinder head is it is the key to all the horsepower you build. No matter what camshaft you use or anything, basically. I've seen camshafts that only lift 485 perform as well as one that'll lift 545. Doesn't make any difference what lift you got right there. It's the horsepower that you get. I got two different cylinder heads, basically, but you build a good cylinder head, and even the one with 485 basically will outperform the one that has a 445 or 554, or 545 lift, the higher lift. So when it comes right down to it, if you're going to go racing, this is where you pay all of your attention. If you really actually get down to it, you'd pay more attention to this than anything else, although if you didn't pay enough attention to your bottom end, you're not going to run them as hard as you can.
If you had a choice, Ward, when you start out with a bare casting, do you like the 12G 940, the AEG 163, or the 12G 1316 smog port like these?
Well, I don't think that they're. I kind of like these. There is a reason why I like these. because nobody wanted them, and because they were smog heads.
Mm-hmm.
They weigh 5 pounds more than the other heads. So I just figured there's got to be more cast iron there. So that's kind of the reason why I like them. But
More to grind away.
yeah, more meat to make the head into what you want. But these start out with a little bit smaller intake valve, and I think it might be easier to get the shapes that I want out of an A+ head than one of these. But if I don't grind through one of these, then it really doesn't make any difference. The whole difference between now we've only talked about the alignment, but in reality there's more that you measure basically. You see this head here. You got 2 holes drilled right down over the top of the intake ports. That's to tell where the top of the intake port is and see how much you can actually take out of the top before you grind a hole in it, because some of them get a little thin. Well, when they put those carbons in there, basically they're not all the same. They get bent. They're on wires, and they get bent a little this way, or they get put in that way, or whatever. Well, when they put this part in underneath here to make that water passage, if it's bent up a little bit like this, all of a sudden the measurement between here and there gets a lot more preferable for making a real cylinder head out of it. But if you measure it and find out that the dang thing's real thin at the top or whatever, then you might as well. I also note that when you're looking at these push rod holes, sometimes, and I got one that they drilled from the other side too, and it was misaligned, so the push rod hole isn't actually just straight through. Most of them are just straight on through. But I got one that's, and probably more than one around here that's been kind of done this way or whatever, and it makes it real hard to actually lay this out so that you can actually tell right where the push rod hole is. Because see, I put all these lines on it here, and I measure from the push rod hole here. I got a dowel that I go in there and square it out and draw these lines basically so I can tell right where it is. Well, when you got one of those things that has a double hole in it, one of them's a little wrench this way or that way, then of course it makes it dang hard to figure out how far you really actually can grind it out as far as size is concerned. So anyhow, to bore a hole right here in the top and measure down to the top of the port gives you a measurement that varies from one head to another, and in actuality it takes a number of cylinder heads. Brian and I have got our cylinder head collection together, and I'm talking about all these cylinder heads over here that are Austin America, or the air pump heads. Basically, are probably 60% of them are air pump heads. Probably, we got them all out, and we drilled them and we measured them and stuff like that. And out of we had about 30 some odd heads or whatever. We found about 4 of them that we'd use. That had more preference than maybe some of the other ones.
That was probably a pretty good percentage, really.
Yeah, they say about 1 in 25 you can make a superior head out of it if you know what you're doing. Or you also might make a piece of junk because you grind a hole in the thing and you got a hole in your water passage. I got one right over here. I just got through doing.
Can you weld it up?
Huh?
Can you weld it up?
JB Weld.
JB Weld, I thought that was your best friend.
No, actually, we got some other stuff that we can stick in the hole bed. I don't. For a cylinder head that goes on a motor that's, we're talking about time you get through with all this, about $22, $23, maybe $24,000. You don't mess with a cylinder head that's got a hole in it. I might patch one up and put it on a street car, but I wouldn't chance it on a motor that you got a lot of money in for sure. Yeah. And then of course, you go through a lot of effort to get to the racetrack, expense and the efforts and stuff like that. And when you get there, you want everything to work perfect. Because other than that, you blow the whole damn weekend. And all the effort and whatever you put together to trying to think you can even get there. People don't even have a clue to the kind of hours and effort that I actually put into these race cars. Hours and hours. But that's my hobby, and that's what I like doing. I was raised in a racing family. Can't hardly think of a weekend that I hadn't been to some sort of a race, whether it be a midget race or a drag race or some hydroplane race someplace in my life. Or then again, all the sports car racing that I've done over the years. So racing is one of those things that there's only one cure for. Either doing it or dying. Because other than that, I'm still doing it.
Do you have a head around here that you would consider be a primo head?
I think the one they put on my car.
Yeah. Yeah, I got one of those. Now we got a couple of them over here on the end of the bench, basically. Here's a cylinder head that we were just running on this car here last year. You see, I noticed. You noticed that I show you the ports and stuff like that, so that you know what they look like or whatever.
All your secrets are right there.
And then this head here was the 2004 national champion. Then you get to see the ports real good on that one. And then you get to this Longman head that I got sitting here, and it's actually a really good head. But you can see all the effort that they go through to be able to make a pretty head out of it. Anyhow, so that's a pretty good sample of a cylinder head. I'm not this proud of mine. Because I don't port so clean like they polish these or whatever.
That's an old head too.
Well, they still do it the same way.
Yeah.
Why are you bypassing the water off the thermostat housing over to the heater belt?
Well, to be able to pull some of the water towards the back of the cylinder head.
Keep the temperatures even between 1, 2, 3, and 4. Did you find that you had hot spots or something with the water cooling?
You do have a hot spot.
Uh-huh.
You do have a hot spot in all of these heads basically, and that's this center exhaust port.
Mm-hmm.
This runs real hot here. This is a lot hotter than what your temperature gauge says. And the idea is to try and that's the sore spot in the cylinder head basically. Is that center exhaust port. Well, I guess I could show you the head that I'm porting right now. I'll bring it out.
So that's a smog port. That was
Okay,
2000.
so here we're looking at another 12G1316 smog port, okay? This is a 12G1316 smog port.
Just put it back up again, would you?
Oh.
You don't even mess with that cylinder.
He was asking.
Basically, this is the one I'm hogging out now, basically. But this is actually like an A+ head or whatever. And I was thinking that, because the valve's being made bigger in the begin with, you have maybe a little more meat in here or whatever, so they don't bore a hole in them or whatever. Real easy to knock a hole in them. But you can see my porting basically it's rough and straight and whatever you see. And I don't usually polish beyond that. That's usually about all it gets. At one time or another, I used to polish them, but these days I leave them rough. I like to polish out the exhaust so you don't get a lot caught in there. But as far as the intake is concerned, I just leave them rough. And there's a reason for it.
And that's the hole you drilled to measure how far you can go?
Yeah. See, I had a measure of 560. This is an unusually exceptional cylinder head right there.
Couldn't you do it with a caliper?
Well, I do. But you got to stick it through that hole into the water passage and get it through the water passage to the top of the port, basically. 'Cause
Oh,
there's
okay.
There's this hollow in between there.
Okay, I see it. Yeah.
See, so that's the effort you go through. A lot of people will it's like on this cylinder head. See how big the exhaust ports are?
Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah, well, that's opened up a lot of exhaust port, but in reality, I get more flow out of this head than they do out of this one right here. And you see how much smaller they are. But the big deal what I like to do is just smooth them out and take some of the nerds out of the way, but leave them thick because especially the center exhaust port, because of the fact that you get all the heat out of there. This runs a lot hotter. This runs a lot hotter than the rest of the head does, as far as the ports are concerned. And so I like even more metal in here. I take shape it a little bit, but other than that, I like to just clean the thing out and take the obvious things out of there, because really exhaust ports are not nearly important in what you do in this on the intakes. The intakes are everything. The exhaust, well, they are something. But if you got to realize that your exhausts out of your cylinder by the time the piston hits the bottom dead center. So in reality, you're powering the exhaust out of the exhaust port by opening up the exhaust valve before the piston hits bottom dead center. What you're doing is expelling the power that's not really powering the piston down anymore. It's pretty much lost the power, and they just open up the exhaust valve before it gets to bottom dead center. Now, if you got everything tuned just right, basically, at that particular point, and this is what they call tailpipe tuning, basically, is to be able to get they go out in waves, back and forth. You ever take and put your hand on the tailpipe when it's idling? You can feel it go plop like this. And that's the same way it does, even faster. So basically, the camshaft opens it up and expels the exhaust out before it gets to the bottom dead center. And if the tune length is proper, you'll have zero pressure in that barrel at the bottom of the stroke, basically, or as it comes over the bottom of the stroke. You have less than atmospheric pressure in that cylinder. Then on the way up, basically, you open your intake valve 65 degrees before top dead center. Start opening it. So in reality, what they call an exhaust stroke isn't even an exhaust. It's a exhaust stroke, but hell, the exhaust is already gone. So all you're doing is running the piston up to the top so you can start all over again with an intake stroke. So I don't believe that the exhaust stroke or the exhaust port is nearly as important as the intake. Some intake ports might not be nearly as important if you have it turbocharged, supercharged, or something like that, because you're packing it in. But these things here, the exhaust port is the restriction. Or I mean, the intake port is the restriction. And trying to get it through the valve, because you don't have 4 valves, you only have 2 valves. So all the magic in a motor, as far as performance is concerned, you got a racing camshaft, yeah, okay, don't make any difference really what racing camshaft is until you really get to the end of it all. You got to have a good cylinder head before you know that you even got a good camshaft. So basically, spend your time racing right there in your cylinder head, and then whatever else you hook up to it probably will work pretty good. Jeremy, he said he was having some heads CNC ported or whatever. Hope you had a good pattern to pattern it with, but other than that, basically, that's everybody everybody I know doesn't want an 850 in their Mini for some reason or another. And it's only because 1275s perform better. And it kind of depends upon in your own mind how far you really want to take it to how much performance you get. Pulling over 150 horsepower, running over 9,000 RPM. And that's where we're at with these things. This is the latest valve spring setup here. Is what they call a Beehive Spring. It's only a single spring basically. You don't see a double spring. And this is the spring that cured NASCAR. In the past, before they made these springs, they were actually dropping valves damn near every race that you ever heard of. And they were only spinning them, 8,500 RPMs. You see these guys shoving them a Chevrolet motor or a Ford motor, 9,800 RPMs with these things in their single valve spring. But because of the way the double valve spring works, and they put cameras inside of the valve covers and run them on dynos to find out why they were breaking them. And basically what it was is the two springs themselves were setting up a harmonics, and the spring material's brittle enough to where it'll actually crack at that particular point. These valve springs are not even round. That's not even a round wire. This is an oval shaped wire, basically, and compresses differently and have different height setups for coil bind and stuff like that than the average spring. But as far as I'm concerned, that's probably it takes a while to find the right part, and Brian's done hours and hours of research on this stuff, and he's the one that came up with the valve springs. But Brian, he comes up with, well, I knocked my head against the wall for years and years trying to get the right parts and pieces and stuff like that. And he said, so I'll do that. Yeah, now what are you saying, Brian? Oh my God, what a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's just basically trying to keep up with racing parts for minis these days. Boy, I'm really skeptical. It's just really PC, basically. We're having to have things made for ourselves because they don't make them anymore and stuff like that. Unreal compared to, we'd have never have done something like that if they were making things. But hell, we're having to have special gearboxes made, gear sets made. Brian just ordered another 10 sets.
We have 10 sets, and we're doing some for sprites and to remedy the failures of the latest and the greatest that don't work.
Are these lay shafts or lay
No, we're
gears?
talking
Just gearboxes
gearboxes
basically.
in general.
Mm.
Metallurgy issues, design issues.
Machining issues.
Yeah.
I mean, just to get something good from the English, I don't know. I don't know if they have any anymore. As far as I'm concerned, every race part that I put in my motor, if I can, will be made in America. Because we're the only people that actually make something of quality, and you can. It's like dealing with Nick at Swift Tune. I mean, a guy, I'm sure he's pissed us off, actually. I mean, so what it is? How many gearboxes have we bought from him, and how many of them come out good?
I mean, if we start.
Have we had one that's actually good out of 10 of them? Or whatever, that hasn't had some sort of problem before we got it?
Still, we're crossing our fingers.
Well, we're working on the problems and stuff like that, but shit, it seems like somebody would work that problem out before they'd ship it to you.
Yeah.
Other than that, I just got a set of gears. I just got a set of gears from MED, and I was re-gearing my Jackknight gearbox. I probably spent 4 hours making the pinion gear go onto the shaft. Just because the splines didn't fit. I mean, and it's just the next step you make. What next thing do I have to fit? Because it doesn't fit or whatever. I wish, it'd really be nice to take one of these days. It'd be really nice to take all these pieces out of a box and put it together in a motor and light it off and have it be a real good motor. But I can tell you what, there's a hell of a lot of work trying to fit all this stuff together because nothing works. Nothing works. Basically, you got to do it yourself. So, anyhow, that's cylinder heads. You got any other questions about cylinder heads? that I haven't covered, or
Oh, thank you.
a good machinist that goes a long ways too.